Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. If you're going to acquire and use good hand saws, there's good reason to learn how to maintain and sharpen them yourself. There will come a time when you may need to joint the tooth line. I'm going to show you how to do that. Stay with me. Now, the purpose of jointing is to bring all of the points of these teeth back into one straight line. So I should be able to look down there and nice straight, or actually hold it against the straight edge and see the same thing. We would use a file, and in the process of running a file along the end of that, the top of those teeth, some of them are going to have more taken off than others, but you keep doing it until you see that you're touching the tops of every tooth. Like I said, some you may have taken off more than others. Then you're going to go in and file it, and you would file each tooth until you bring that little flat spot that we created in the jointing process back to a point. And at that stage, it's ready to cut. It should cut beautifully. Now, I'm not talking about restoring an old saw. That's a topic for another video. I'm talking about taking care of the saws that you have. And what you need to consider is how many people actually do this professionally? Very few. There's no demand. There's no demand, there's no supply. So if you're going to have really good saws and you want to keep them in great shape, you're going to need to learn to do this stuff yourself, most likely. Well, let's kick this a little bit further. So here's a brand new saw. This is our dovetail saw. I don't think this has had more than a few cuts on it, and only test cuts. When you get it, teeth are nice and sharp. You can feel that as you run your finger against the direction of the cut. The set is identical, meaning the teeth are bent the same amount on each side, and you have a nice straight blade, and the cutting line across here is nice and straight. The result is, when you start cutting wood, each tooth is doing its job. Sawdust is accumulating in the gullet, dumps out on the other side. Everything works wonderfully, and you get a nice, straight cut, very predictable. It's actually a real pleasure to use. You can hear it cut, and that's how you want your saws to work all the time. So probably the most common question I get is, when do you sharpen your saw? Well, you have to sharpen your saw when the cutting process just isn't what it used to be. You can hear that, you can feel it, it's very aggressive, cuts quickly, cuts nice and clean, and it's also a nice straight result. And if it starts to go to one side or the other, you know there's something wrong. If it seems to be taking longer than it used to, or you can just simply feel it like this. When I run my fingers backwards against the face of the tooth, it grabs them instantly. As that tooth starts to dull, you'll feel far less resistance when you do that. We'll leave you a link below on sharpening, dovetail saw or rip saw. But what we want to do here is just talk about the actual stage of jointing those teeth, make sure that tooth line is nice and straight from front to back. Based on the number of questions that I field every week on sharpening saws, I'm going to head that off by telling you jointing the saw is not something you have to do every time. In fact, you may go a very long time before you ever have to do this. But also, that's going to depend upon your ability to sharpen and how careful you are when you do it. When I say that, I mean when I file, I always make sure I count the number of strokes, and I try to keep the amount of pressure I apply consistent from front to back. It's that inconsistency on the pressure that's going to cause this to eventually hollow out somewhere along the middle. So count your strokes and be very careful. And I never apply a lot of pressure. You'll find out what's just light and comfortable, just enough for the file to bite. But how do you determine it if it needs to be? Well, you're just going to put it up against the straight edge, and you want to make sure every tooth touches. It's probably more common to have to joint your hand saw than a dovetail saw, simply because of the length and the variability over all of those teeth. But not a hard process. I'm going to show you how. Now that we know we've answered the questions why and how often, let's get at it. Okay, let's go it over. Okay, start again. Go. Okay, let's go over what you're going to need. This is a shop-built vise, something to hold the saw. It's obviously, I'd make a longer one if I was going to be doing hand saws all the time, but this will work. And it's just designed to pinch that up near the top of the blade, although this time we're going to have it up a little bit higher, so I'll slip that in there with lots of room. You'll see why in a moment. Don't hesitate to go and buy a new file. Some folks don't seem to realize these wear out. They don't last forever. And once they're dull, they're almost useless. So get yourself a new file. They're not expensive. And this is I think this is a 12-inch mill bastard, it's called. Single cut. Should be able to find something like that in any hardware. I'm going to go from the back to the front, obviously, instead of coming against the teeth. Now I took a block of wood and I cut a slot in it that would hold the file. I'll just tap that in there. And the idea is we want to keep this square on the end. So part of the block is going to rest on the side of the blade, holding this. Now, that last thing, and you don't have to do this, but depending on where how your eyes are, you may want to go in and just with a Sharpie or a felt tip of some sort, go in and paint. Another reason to go back to front. Paint the tops of the teeth, and it'll just make it a little bit easier. By the way, it's going to ruin your Sharpie or your marker. Just makes it easier to identify which tooth you've actually worked on. And we're going to do this until we go through and touch all of them. So holding this against the side of the saw to keep it so that the the file stays square to the end of the teeth. And you're going to start on one end. Just work your way through. I'm going to actually move this a little bit and help stiffen it a little bit out there. I've got more blade here to keep it stiff. Now I got to get my headgear on. So if we look, we only had a couple of strokes. We're touching here. Some of these teeth haven't been touched. There's some there. These ones. Some here not touched. Some here not touched. So we're just going to keep going. We don't have to go a certain depth. Just we want to make sure that we've touched all the teeth and brought that back to being a nice straight line. I think this one wasn't too bad. I think we've touched every tooth. Oh, there's one right there that isn't. I'll give it one more stroke. And there's one there, a couple there. Another one. Remember to be pushing tight against the bottom of the block to keep that file square. Okay. All right, I think we've touched all of them. Now at this point, we're going to go in, and this time when we file, and like I said, we'll leave a link to the video below on how to do this. But when we file, we're going to want those teeth very close so that they're well supported. And we're going to go in, and now we've got to get rid of all of those shiny spots by taking enough off of each tooth to bring it back to that point. Remember, you affect each tooth from two different strokes. One catches the front of it, one catches the back of it. So just bear that in mind. Try to really practice so that the pressure you apply is the same. This time you're not going to count the strokes because you're actually filing with a purpose, and that is to reduce or barely touch a tooth depending on how much we had to take off the top. Hope this helps. Follow these simple instructions. It's not difficult. You might want to practice on an old saw first, but good luck with it. Enjoy your woodworking. If you enjoy my method of work and like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. I've always said better tools make the job so much easier. If you click on the plane and chisel icon below, it'll take you to our site and introduce you to all the tools that we actually manufacture right here in our shop. It'll also give you information on our in-person and online workshops.